Welcome to another episode of the Community Podcast, a conversational podcast exploring the stories, insights, and strategies behind learning-centric communities. Our mission, I am super excited today to welcome Paul Slater, author of The AI Ready Human, note speaker on the future of work, and an AI enablement advisor helping to build human-centric organizations to adapt to an AI-transformed world. After more than a decade at Microsoft leading digital transformation and commercial strategy, Paul's work now focuses on a central idea. AI readiness is not just about mastering new tools, but building the human capabilities needed to stay valuable, adaptable, and fulfilled as work changes. Paul, it's awesome to have you on the show. How are you doing today? Yeah, I've been waiting to have you on the show for quite a while, and I'm pumped that we're going to have such a great conversation. I'm going to dive right in, Paul. I first met you.
It's great to
One
be
of the
with you
first things
today,
I got to
Fran.
know about you is how passionate you are about the intersection of human intelligence and human capabilities and artificial intelligence and artificial capabilities, which that's the world we live in. And this inspired you to write The AI Ready Human. I'd love for you to chart a brief journey of how you got there and what inspired you to write this book.
Yeah, so my thoughts about the intersection of humans and technology began very, very early. When I left college, my first real job out of college was in IT training. And I've been around for a while, so that time was actually around the time where computers started to arrive on people's desks, or more accurately, under their desks, because they were too big to fit on people's desks. So a lot of people were literally encountering computers for the first time at the time at which they were starting to use them for work. Of course, there were hobbyists who were like playing with things like VIC-20s and Commodore 64s and things like that. But for many, it was like, oh, there is this new thing called a computer. You might have heard of it. And go figure out how to use it. And of course, very rapidly, they discovered that when you handed it to your average office employee, they had no clue how to use it. And so they sent them off on training courses like the ones that I delivered. And that was just such a fascinating time because you got to see how people learn to use this entirely new thing, but you also get to see how it affects them as humans and how it disrupts the way in which they work. Literally, that first week, I had what came to be known in our profession as a crier, a bit like an emergency room. The emergency room docs talk about bleeders, right? So I had a guy who was probably around the age I am now, and he broke down in tears and said, "I'm never going to get this. My job's over. My career's over. What am I going to be able to do?" And so ever since that moment, I have thought of technology as simultaneously interesting tool that people have to learn and something that impacts us as humans, impacts the way we do things, but also impacts how we think, how we feel, all of those other aspects. And so that thread has actually worked its way all through my career. Now, towards the latter part of my 10 years at Microsoft, I had morphed into a role where a lot of my time was spent with Microsoft Research, and I was acting as a translation layer between the interesting AI innovations that were happening there. This is pre-LLMs. We're talking things like machine vision, for example, and translating those into potential use cases for customers predominantly in the health and life sciences domain. And it was at that time where I saw a window into where we were moving. And I started to think about the not just AI itself, but the convergence of technologies like AI, robotics, automation, things of that nature. And I could pretty clearly see that this was going to have a massive societal impact, not just like a new version of a software product. That's where the germ of the ideas around the book came into play. I built a startup associated with giving people skills necessary for the future of work, and then started thinking seriously about how this was going to translate into a book that I would hope people would find genuinely valuable beyond here's how to do prompt engineering, but towards the idea of here's how I need to think, feel, and act differently in this new world.
So I think the only constant we have, Paul, is change. Every single day, there's more that's happening in terms of industry pushing the envelope, individuals pushing the envelope on their understanding and their capabilities, and the tools are. It's the pace of change is so rapid that I don't think anybody can reasonably be up to speed on everything at once, right? Or everything at all times, maybe is a better way to put it. What I love about the book as I made my way through it was how practical it is. It's a 90-day practical guide to taking these measurable incremental steps in your daily life and the work that you do and the way that you interact with technology to get yourself to the point where AI doesn't seem like this looming thing that you have to battle with. It's something you can actually integrate and actually benefit from in your day to day. So that's something that as a reader, I really enjoyed. And that's what I encourage listeners to also kind of go in with that lens when they explore your work and they read the book for themselves. What were some of the aha moments, Paul, that, as you did the research for this book and over the course of your career, when you're seeing AI being applied in the human realm, in the workforce realm, what are some of the biggest findings, maybe good and bad or surprising, that you've been able to really come up with so far?
Well, you touched on something that's very interesting in your preamble there that feeds directly into your question, right? This whole idea of keeping up is something that is genuinely challenging for people, possibly in a way that has never been this challenging before. We've fundamentally changed how we build and deliver software now. So it used to be that I'll use a tool we've all used, something like Microsoft Office, right? It used to be that there was a new version of Microsoft Office that came out every few years. And when that new version came out, about 80-90% of your learning from using the previous one, if you'd used it, was applicable. And then you just did a little bit of training on the Delta. And then very rapidly, you were up to speed on the new version. And so we could think about growing ourselves to use technology in the context of release cycles of the technology that we were using. And that just doesn't happen anymore, right? I mean, if you're using an AI tool today, it's a very different tool than the one you were using 2 months or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And this concept of keeping up doesn't just extend to the specific tool that you're using. There are new things happening literally every day. I just recently started a job as the Principal AI Technologist for Adobe. It's my job to keep up with all of this stuff, and still I feel that challenge. I'm very fortunate in the sense that I have a full-time job where the majority of it is to keep up with this stuff. But of course, most of us have a full-time job that has got nothing to do with keeping up with this stuff, and yet we still have in some way to keep up with this stuff. So I think one of the primary challenges is related to exactly that. How do I remain personally effective amidst a landscape which is constantly changing? The Institute for the Future, who I've had on my podcast a few times and spent some time working with, they have a term for it, which they refer to as BANI, B-A-N-I. And for people who are familiar with VUCA, you can think of it as almost an updated version of VUCA. But BANI stands for brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. And they make the argument that that is now the world in which we sit. And what we need are sets of tools to allow us to thrive in that new world. A world where literally tomorrow may be completely different to today. A new innovation is a moment away, and we need to find ways to work effectively in that environment as individuals, as teams, and as organizations. Because even at an organizational level, you're now in a world where anything you do could be disrupted almost overnight. It changes things like what's the residual, if you build software, what's the value of that when somebody else could recreate your software at a moment's notice, right? What does a competitive moat look like? All of these questions are fundamentally shifted by this world of AI, and we got to figure out how to thrive in it.
I think that's a call to action for everybody that uses a computer, a phone, is connected to the internet, which essentially is all of us, if you're listening to this podcast. So there's a tremendous amount of information out there. I think my biggest aha moment, kind of asking the question to myself, is trying to understand when I look at technologies, I try to understand, is this going to be applicable to my daily life in a way that's going to enable me to get to a result faster or achieve something better? That was an aha moment for me. And it was actually something that was predicated frustration with technology in other times of my life when I was trying to do something and I couldn't get it to work the way that I wanted to because I didn't have a use case that I could actually be passionate about, motivated about. I feel like that's almost the most important thing. I recently started using Claude after using ChatGPT almost exclusively. And Claude, I'm beginning to realize is I'm a lot more sanitized in my use of Claude. Like I took a very purposeful and deliberate approach to this new software because ChatGPT for me was the Wild West. It was the first one that I made an account for back in November 2023, whatever it was. And I use it as a search engine. I use it to translate text. I use it to find flights. It just became a massive uncontrolled area of thought, like a mind dump in a chat form almost, right? And so, but then for my business, I was like, you know what? I need something that's a bit more sanitized, controlled, measured, and I can kind of demarcate. ChatGPT is where the crazy stuff lives, and Claude is where the work stuff lives, the better kind of organized and more thoughtful stuff lives. And almost immediately, I started building skills. Now I have skills for everything in Claude, for my LinkedIn posts, for some of the podcasting work that I am doing as well. And it was interesting because I resisted moving to another platform because I thought I'd have to reinvent the wheel in so many ways. That was the fear. And then when I did so, but I did so in a very work centric way. Like Claude is just going to be for work. Claude is going to be business stuff, formal. I'm going to teach it stuff that can help me. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I genuinely look forward to opening up Claude and exploring more. Like I haven't done the co-working aspect of it yet. I want to, and I can see a lot of other options for that in the work I do with my clients, et cetera. So anyway, kind of tying that all of those threads together, the pace of change is never going to decrease. I think it's only going to get more and more accelerated. We as individual practitioners or aspiring practitioners need to find strong use cases that can motivate us, whether that's our business, whether that's a passion project that we're working on, some way where we can actually take this kind of not amorphous, but take something that lives in this digital realm and bring it into the day-to-day of what we're doing and how it actually achieves results for us in the flow of work, right? And that work could be your actual job or it could be something you do outside of work. Any thoughts or reflections there, Paul?
Well, yes, a lot actually. And I think you've sparked something that I think is very interesting. And for me, is some of the deeper work that I'm focused in on right now. How we work changes who we are. And it literally biologically, it changes who we are because how we work causes us to form new neural pathways and it causes other neural pathways to degrade, right? So how you use AI will cause you to literally become a different person. And so the most interesting aspect that I found in the research that I did for the AI Ready Human was to find that AI has this effect on people that it tends to accelerate or amplify every internal sort of tendency that we already have. So, for example, if we tend to be a little bit random, AI allows us to be a lot more random. Right? If we tend to be rather organized, AI can help us organize more effectively. And of course, if we do behave really randomly, then our ability to organize, if it wasn't great in the first place, is going to become further degraded because we're having to do less of it. And so the way that made its way into the book was I started to look at some fundamental human capabilities that we all need to be able to thrive in the world of work, things like our overall well-being, our ability to organize, our ability to control, our ability to stay motivated, our ability to find balance between our work and our non-work, our ability to be resilient through change, and our ability to be able to adapt. I looked at the effect that AI is having on those things, and then how we can make sure that those characteristics and capabilities remain strong, because fundamentally they're needed in order for us to be able to thrive in the world of work. I love the way you're approaching it, because what you're basically saying is when you started playing with ChatGPT, it became this sort of reflection of the random part of you. And now you're looking at Claude and you're at least attempting to make it a reflection of the organized, disciplined human you need to be in order to grow your work. And it's a very interesting and useful separation that you make, knowing that each of those uses will amplify the underlying elements of who you are.
Yeah, they definitely complement each other. It's not that I'm abandoning ChatGPT. I legitimately need those kind of whimsical moments with AI. I'm trying to respond with a funny comment to what a friend is saying. And I mean, I generally tend to just fire from the hip when it comes to being facetious, and as my friends will know. But sometimes I want to add a little bit of flair, and maybe I'll go to ChatGPT for that, right? Or I'm trying to research something and I need a quick primer on whatever I'm trying to look up. ChatGPT will still be my go-to there. I do see my dependence on ChatGPT waning a little bit, though, as I go into other tools, specifically Claude, but then maybe others that I continue to research. And now I think the biggest next step for me, and I'm going to introduce another theme to our conversation, Paul, is agentic workflows. And I would love to hear your take on agentic workflows. I think a lot of our listeners have also heard the term or maybe playing around with agents doing work for them. How do you make the leap, and what should people know about agentic workflows in general?
So before we get into that, I think there's one foundational thing that we should talk about that is very important, because it will help frame this next part of the conversation. It's really important to understand that the technology that we're using today, the generative AI type technology that we're using today, has come upon us very rapidly after some people in a lab discovered that if you could predict the next word in a sentence, you could create something with appropriate sophistication. You could create something that kind of appeared to think for itself and could be genuinely useful as a thought partner. And that's kind of like where we got to. Similarly, with agentic, it's sort of a similar story. Some people in a lab kind of figure out, okay, well, if I can introduce some autonomy to this thing, then potentially I can create something that is, again, a sort of order of magnitude more powerful again. So we often think about these as like very controlled releases. And in reality, what's happened is it's like, oh, this is super powerful. Let's get it to the market. So this thing that we're all excited about right now, about agentic, and the way in which agentic is implemented and harnessed, is a reflection of a point of time that we're in. Right? We could be having a conversation about this in 2 years' time with an entirely different metaphor, an entirely different way of working associated with all of this, and be like, where did that come from? Just like, where did LLMs come from? Where did generative AI more broadly come from? Where did agentic come from? So it's always important to kind of like have that. So right now, probably appropriately, the flavor of the month is agentic. And you can think of agentic as being a form of AI whereby is capable of taking a relatively simple set of instructions and then performing actions based on that relatively simple set of instructions. So instead of giving it a question and it answering your question, almost like in a souped up Siri way, just being like Siri but not crap, right? There is a version of it effectively that whereby you say to it, I don't know, go research flights and book one for me, and it can go, it's a very commonly used version of it, but go ahead and take the outcome that I want to produce and then take all the decisions that you need to take in order to get me to the outcome. That's it at its simplest, but already having in mind the, oh man, now it's good at this, now it's good at this, now it's good at this. Already that in itself is evolving. And we're starting to look at, okay, when you get a bunch of agents together, for example, can you learn from the continued deployment of these agents and all of that kind of stuff? So we're kind of moving from, let's have an interesting chat that can spark some ideas, to let's have it do something, and now towards let's have a whole bunch of them that are different to each other do things. Let's have all those work together and let's have it learn from all of those things working together. So that's sort of the path down which we're moving with agentic. I think there's a couple of really interesting open questions when it comes to all of this. Number one, an open question is that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about this, but the paradigm with which we engage with AI is basically one paradigm, which is a linear conversation. And that is a reflection of what I mentioned before, that AI is really good at predicting the next word in a sentence, right? So in a very real sense, when you're typing into ChatGPT or Claude and it's figuring out what the next word should be, it's rather than really replying to you, it's sort of continuing the set of words that you've already provided it with. And so it creates an obvious linear conversational flow. But many of us don't work like that. And this is where agents can become quite powerful as one solution to the problem. Many of us are like, okay, well, I'm building a project that I'm in control of, and I need to make progress on this and this and this and this and this and this simultaneously. And then as I've made progress on all of those things simultaneously, I need to bring all those things together in order to be able to make progress on the project as a whole. And so where this is sort of shifting, moving towards, is this idea of moving away from the construct of a linear conversation and towards making progress on a series of things simultaneously and allowing a more parallel view of how we work with AI. You'll see that partly with agents. You'll see that partly with how we interact with agents, so through bots and things like that. And you will also see it in the nature of the design of the next wave of AI systems that will not always be conversational.
I think there's a lot to unpack there, Paul, and I encourage listeners to actually do a little bit of research on their own in terms of where some of these agents are some pretty incredible outcomes. I was at a talk recently, and the speaker there was talking about OpenClaw, if I'm not mistaken. And with great power comes great responsibility, kind of thing. Agents are able to execute a lot of tasks on your behalf if you give them the right inputs and the right instructions, but you also have to monitor very closely that they're acting within the parameters or guidelines that are safe for you and the workflow that you're doing. So I think this podcast episode is very unique in that we're talking about things as practitioners and we're kind of pressure testing some of our assumptions live, which is great. I love that. And so much of this is changing that we can't really predict or say certain things are going to be certain ways because there's no way to know. And yeah, and a lot of it is really to kind of excite us to be that much more exploratory and that much more curious about all these different tools that we have at our disposal, I would say. Let's take the conversation in a slightly different direction, Paul, which is thinking about, this is actually kind of a curveball question because I've never thought about it this way. So
I love curveball questions, especially speaking of the book. It's really nice to have the question that you're not expecting. So.
Yeah, and I literally just thought about this right now when you were describing the idea, the very real fact that when you're interacting with an interface like ChatGPT, it's a text-based linear output. And even for somebody like me who enjoys reading, I do find it overwhelming at times when I'm trying to search, go back and whatever. Is there a conversation in the AI space around accessibility? And what's happening there? Because I have no clue.
Well, there's a conversation about accessibility. There's a conversation about connected to it around neurodiversity as well.
Yeah.
The accessibility stuff is more or less what you might expect, right? So right now, the best we can do through the traditional tools that folks will be familiar with, and it's kind of weird talking about something so new as traditional, but I mean things like Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, etc. The best we can really do right now is have it speak to us and have us speak back to it. But that is still a linear construct. And even within that, all we're really doing is kind of bolting on a speech recognition front end to it, right? And the irony is that even with something as powerful as Claude, its ability to parse the way that human beings speak is not as effective as if you, for example, something that has that dedicated function like whisper flow, for example, in front of it. You will get better results if you talk into whisper flow and paste it into your prompt than you will if you just click the microphone icon in Claude. So right now, as I say, talking to it and it talking to us back is more or less as good as we get. But moving forward, the real question, if you think about accessibility, is what's the best way to present information, and what's the best way to have the person that's using it to present information to the system in order for it to be as useful and effortless as for those of us that can just either type or talk to it. And so that does raise questions about the linear paradigm that I was just describing. The linear paradigm that I was describing is an open question for the way people work. If you're a designer, for example, you don't necessarily want to design a video just with one stream. You might want to work in framing alongside AI, alongside a storyboard and all of that kind of stuff, and then tweak individual elements of an image rather than just going back and forth on a prompt. Some of that is working its way into design tools already, but the same principles can be used in order to be able to deal with interactions that handle accessibility issues. On the neurodiversity side, it's really intriguing. We've seen some evidence so far, for example, that people with ADHD have a disproportionately high dopamine response associated with using AI, and particularly if they get highly into agentic. Imagine a scenario where you've got a dozen agents that are working on your behalf, and you can chat with all of them through bots or something along those lines. And every time one of those rapid thoughts pops into your head, you can go get Agent A or Agent B or Agent C working on it. And they can all work at the speed of light and give you all of the information that you need back at the speed of light. So there seems to be some evidence that creates an extremely strong dopamine response in some folks with ADHD. There'll be some additional research coming out on that, I hope, relatively soon. But anecdotally, you see a lot of information associated with that. That raises the broader question as to whether that makes the world of agentic AI so extraordinarily powerful for people with ADHD that when they have to come back and talk to regular humans, that humans pale in comparison. And similarly, we've seen some interesting work done for people with autism, for example, whereby the interactions with AI are significantly preferable to their interactions with humans as well. So there's some interesting questions around that and some broader societal implications around that as well.
Yeah, and this is a perfect segue, Paul, to kind of the next theme that I wanted to talk to you about, which is, we're, as practitioners, as technologists, as people who enjoy tinkering with these tools and expanding our knowledge of what we can do with them and just building cool stuff. That's a motivation for many of us. We want to be more productive. We want to sound more professional. We want to have fun. We want to achieve whatever outcome it is that we think we can do better with the use of these tools. Fundamentally, that is taking us away. The longer we spend in front of a screen, the less time we have with other people, with individuals, right? And going back to the genesis of the name of my company and the podcast and everything that I do is about bringing people together, learning communities of learning, community. It's something that I continue to ponder about and think about, that, are we doing society a disservice broadly, right? I think we all have to kind of grapple with that overall reality that these tools fundamentally should be enabling us to become better humans, better connectors, better contributors to society, with the tools and everything living in their domain and our human experience living in the human domain. So how have you, maybe as somebody who's doing this kind of work day in and day out, I'd love to hear your thoughts about remaining human as an AI-ready human.
I've struggled with this a lot in terms of what the right analogy is. For a while, I thought of this as being sort of similar to the nuclear age, in the sense that the nuclear age has given us the atomic bomb, which to this day, even though our brains are focused in other areas, if you speak to the folks behind the doomsday clock, remains one of the most significant threats to us as humanity. And if you go back and study your history, you'll realize that we were this close in the 1980s to there being a major, major issue associated with nuclear. But at the same time, it's given us MRI, it's given us very cheap power, it's giving us potentially, as we move forward, the possibility of unlimited cheap and pollution-free power. It's given us all of these different kinds of things. And so for a long time, that was kind of like my go-to analogy. But I think the thing that it doesn't really capture is that for the very first time, we have a general purpose tool that at some point will likely be better than us at broadly most things, right? That's what people refer to as AGI, right? Artificial General Intelligence is a form where it's mostly better than most of us at most things. And some people feel that we're very close to that, and other people feel that we're not so good at it. This represents a huge challenge, right? It represents a challenge because that can and may imply that for most of us, the experience of interacting with AI will be preferable to the experience of interacting with other humans. That's partly why I structured the book in the way that I did, which is I wanted to focus on the human capabilities that we needed. And as I researched the book, what I realized was that in almost all scenarios, AI presents the challenge and simultaneously is the tool that you can use to solve for the very same challenge. So, for example, if I'm struggling to switch off from technology, I can work with AI to formulate a rock-solid plan that fits with who I am. Remember, if I've used AI extensively, it knows quite a lot of who I am, that I can stick to, that allows me to switch off from technology on a regular basis. If I struggle on follow-through with my friends and my colleagues, and follow-through is a huge piece of what keeps relationships going, I can work with AI to build a system that will allow me to follow through more effectively. If I'm struggling to communicate with my friends or my boss or something along those lines, I can work with AI to help understand the point of view of those other people that I'm working with or hanging out with, and use it to become a better colleague, a better employee, a better friend. So it's almost like you've got this massive amount of power, and how you choose to direct that power is going to result in whatever outcome we're looking for. But there's one extremely important thing that has to underlie that. We have to make a decision as individuals, as communities, to understand that this human dimension is really important, and in order to sustain it, we have to work on it. Because if we don't, then we risk kind of sleepwalking into a world where we're doing the thing that is easier. And if I've learned one thing from my entire career in this field, when human beings are presented with an easier option, unless they consciously make an effort to pick the harder option, they'll do the easier option. So if we're not actively thinking about it, if we're not actively thinking about how we sustain balance between the digital and non-digital world, about how we switch off from our technology, about how we connect and communicate with others, about how we monitor our thinking to make sure that we're not just slipping into kind of mediocre thought guided by AI. If we're not actively doing those things, then we'll just wake up each morning, grab our phones, and maybe the difference will be that instead of grabbing Facebook, let's say we were looking at Facebook each morning when we woke up, now the first thing that pops into our head, we're gonna go ask Claude about it or whatever. Yeah. So we just have to make sure that we're putting the guardrails in place, because those guardrails are not there structurally anymore. the guardrails are gone. We got to figure out what we're going to do in order to be able to maintain that human connection.
Yeah, and it's a continuous work in progress. Continuous thing to revisit, to strengthen, to identify gaps and understand and really be real with ourselves, I think is what that's the task at hand.
And do the hard work, like I say, because that is the hard work. The
Yeah.
easy work is just, whatever AI tells me.
Yeah, that's right. As individuals, as teams, societies, communities, and eventually, I'm guessing there's going to be some higher level, maybe governance around this at a national level or even international level. There's probably folks thinking about, I know for a fact that there's institutions that are contemplating governance and ethics and all these other types of topics with regards to AI usage and the intersection of AI and humans, essentially what that means for us as a whole.
Yeah, I hope so. About 6 months ago or something like that, I put together something. It's on my Substack, Humanity Working, but I put together something that I called 10 Safeguards for Human-Centric AI, I think I called it. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I did that is because I had some concern about the nature of existing ethical frameworks and responsible AI frameworks. If you look closely, you have to look pretty closely, but if you look closely at those frameworks, you can see the fingerprints of the AI companies on them. And this is not to say that those AI companies are trying to push to one side threats from AGI or even environmental threats associated with data centers. That's a separate argument as to whether they are or not doing that. But in these frameworks, you see sort of reflection of that. But what you don't see so much, at least right now, is the legitimate concerns that we should have about how the use of AI is changing the humans that are using it, and whether those changes are changes that we want. And that's my hope, that the sort of next wave of frameworks that we build really, really hones in on that, right? Are we building a future right now where by definition, humans are thinking less, questioning less, minimizing their own value in a world where human value should be cherished and we are the humans, right? We should cherish the value that humans bring. Is AI sort of causing us to sleepwalk into a future where our own value is diminished? And if it is, what do we do about that? So my hope is that going forward, that the frameworks will not just be purely centered around what AI does, but also centered around the effect of what AI does on the humans that are interacting with it.
That's a fantastic note to conclude, Paul. And I know we're going to be speaking again very soon. It's just I get so many inspirational nuggets of knowledge and calls to action myself whenever we speak. But for our listeners, I'm going to put all of this in the show notes as well, Paul. But we have your website, paulslater.ai. We have your Substack, Humanity Working. Where else can folks find more about what you do and follow your work and all that good stuff?
Yeah, those are actually the main spots. I would say specifically, I'm going to be posting much more regularly on Humanity Working. We have a podcast as well, also called Humanity Working, that we're going to be spending a lot more time looking at.
Nice.
I'd urge people to go there. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, usual spots, LinkedIn. LinkedIn, definitely a good one. You can pop the link into my LinkedIn and folks can follow me on there as well. I love to talk about this stuff. If you have a shared interest in that intersection between where the technology is going and the humans that are using it, love to talk.
I encourage everybody to reach out to Paul with questions or thoughts, not only to follow his work, but to build a connection, because it's been super fun for me to do that. And I hope we can meet in person. We've had so many of these virtual meetings, but I have to get out to the West Coast at some point. Paul, it was such a wonderful experience having you. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. It was great talking to you today.